Imagine walking into a ballroom lit by hundreds of flickering candles. The polished marble floors shine like mirrors, reflecting the golden glow of chandeliers that sway gently above. The air is heavy with perfume, with laughter, with the distant echo of a harpsichord playing a waltz. Noblemen and women glide across the room, their silks rustling, their jewels glittering. But beneath their dancing feet, beneath the very foundation of this magnificent hall, something else lies hidden. Not treasure, not relics of honor, but skulls. Human skulls, carefully placed, deliberately concealed, resting in silence while life and music carry on above them. This is the legend of the Duchess of Parma, a woman whose name was once spoken with reverence, whose beauty and power drew countless admirers, and whose secret has chilled the imaginations of historians for centuries. For beneath the elegance of her reign, behind her graceful smile, lay something far darker, a compulsion, an obsession, a habit of turning lovers into trophies. The ballroom that dazzled Parma's nobility was more than just a stage for dances and banquets. It was a crypt, a carefully curated theater of death. When guests toasted to her health, when they whispered of her charms, none could imagine that below their polished shoes lay the remains of the very men who once whispered words of passion into her ear. But how could such a horror be hidden in plain sight? How could a woman of such status conceal a legacy so macabre that it still shocks us today? To answer that, we must begin with the Duchess herself, not just as a noblewoman of rank, but as a figure living in an age where appearances were everything, and secrets could mean the difference between survival and ruin. The Duchess of Parma lived in a world of dualities. By day, she entertained ambassadors, musicians, and scholars, basking in the glittering reputation of Parma's court. By night, however, she occupied herself with passions and intrigues that went far beyond the boundaries of propriety. To her contemporaries, she was the perfect hostess, the shining jewel of her dynasty. To those who dared to love her, she was both enchantress and executioner. And the ballroom, the very heart of her residence, was the stage upon which this dual life played out. Imagine the scene: violins rising in a swell of music, dancers twirling in choreographed perfection, while just beneath them, unseen, lay the pale grins of skulls. Lovers who once shared her bed now silenced, their only role left to play being eternal spectators to her glory. There is something almost ritualistic in the act. To keep skulls beneath the floor where she entertained, where power was displayed and alliances were forged, suggests not madness alone, but intent. Was it a way to remind herself of power over life and death? A twisted token of love? Or perhaps an attempt to control what all nobles feared most: the whispers of betrayal, the shame of being discarded. As chilling as the story sounds, it did not begin with death, it began with desire. The Duchess's allure was legendary. Men sought her not only for her beauty, but for the influence she wielded. To be her lover was to taste both pleasure and danger, and yet they came willingly, as if drawn by a force they could not resist. What they could not have known was that their passion would outlast their flesh, that in death, they would remain closer to her than any living rival could hope to be. Beneath her feet, quite literally, they would dance with her forever. And so, this is where our story begins. With a woman who turned a place of celebration into a graveyard, who blurred the line between love and possession, between romance and ruin. Tonight, we descend into the shadows of her life. We will walk through the glittering courts of Parma, where politics and lust intertwined. We will uncover the fates of the men who adored her, and how their end was sealed beneath the very floorboards of her home. And we will ask, was the Duchess of Parma truly a monster, or was she a woman ahead of her time, wielding the only power she was allowed, in the only way she could? Because this is not just a tale of murder. It is a tale of contrasts, of beauty and horror, of music and silence, of a noblewoman who danced above the dead. And by the time we reach the end of her story, you may never look at a ballroom the same way again. To understand the Duchess of Parma, we must first understand the world that shaped her. The Duchy of Parma, nestled in the heart of northern Italy, was more than a provincial court. It was a prize, coveted by great dynasties, contested by rival powers, and steeped in both wealth and danger. Its streets bustled with merchants and artisans, but above them, In gilded palaces, the nobility played games of politics that were often far bloodier than they appeared. Parma in the late Renaissance was a place of contradictions. Splendor and sophistication on the surface, secrecy and betrayal in the shadows. The great cathedrals and opera houses spoke of culture and refinement, while the whispers in palace corridors told stories of affairs, assassinations, and conspiracies. It was in this crucible of beauty and treachery that the Duchess of Parma was born. Her lineage was impeccable. Born into a family of power and prestige, she was destined from the cradle to play a role in Italy's tangled web of politics. Like many noblewomen of her time, her life was mapped out before she could even speak: who she would marry, where she would live, and what alliances her body and name would secure for her family. Her marriage, as expected, was not one of love but of strategy, a union designed to bind rival houses together, to strengthen Parma's ties with powerful neighbors, and to ensure her family's continued prominence. To the outside world, she fulfilled her duty flawlessly. She became the radiant duchess, the perfect partner, the consummate hostess, the embodiment of Parma's prestige. But even in these early years, something set her apart. The Duchess was not content to merely be a pawn in dynastic games. Behind the smiles, behind the glittering jewels, was a woman who understood the true currency of power, influence. And she learned quickly how to wield it. She charmed ambassadors, persuaded allies, and disarmed rivals with wit and grace. The court adored her, foreign visitors admired her, and her reputation spread across Italy as a woman of intelligence as well as beauty. Yet every smile she gave masked a calculating mind, one that had grown up watching betrayal and survival play out in her own family. Because make no mistake, life in Parma's court was perilous. Nobles might dress in silk, but they played with daggers. Behind closed doors, marriages crumbled into affairs, brothers betrayed brothers, and poison was often as common a weapon as the sword. One wrong move, one misplaced confidence, and even a duchess could fall. This was the paradox of her world, outwardly dazzling, inwardly deadly. And it was this paradox that shaped the Duchess into more than a passive figurehead. She became a player. As her influence grew, so too did her confidence. She learned to bend tradition to her will, to craft an image of virtue while pursuing her own desires. Her ballroom, glittering with light and music, became the stage not just for entertainment, but for diplomacy. It was there that alliances were cemented over whispered conversations, where favors were traded in the flicker of candlelight, where secrets were as valuable as jewels. But the ballroom also concealed another truth. Behind the glamour, behind the endless ceremonies and courtly rituals, there was loneliness. Noble marriages were rarely affectionate, and for the Duchess, her arranged union brought her position but not the intimacy she craved. It was this void, between public perfection and private emptiness, that opened the door to passion. She began to attract admirers. At first, perhaps, it was innocent, a compliment here, a lingering look there. But soon, the whispers began. Rumors of her beauty, her wit, her allure spread not only through Parma but across neighboring courts. To many men, she was not just a duchess, she was an intoxicating mystery. A woman bound by duty, yet exuding an irresistible magnetism. Lovers began to circle, like moths drawn to a flame. And the Duchess, so long constrained by duty and decorum, began to taste the freedom and the danger of forbidden affection. This was no small risk. For a noblewoman, even the hint of scandal could ruin not just her reputation, but her entire family's standing. Affairs could spark duels, feuds, even political collapse. Yet she walked this razor's edge willingly, perhaps even hungrily. Here we see the first cracks in the polished surface of her life. Outwardly, she was still the ideal duchess, but inwardly, she was beginning a journey that would blur the lines between passion, possession, and destruction. The world around her mirrored this duality. Parma's grandeur was always haunted by shadows. The same palaces that hosted operas and masquerades also hid dungeons and secrets. The same nobles who toasted to alliances plotted assassinations in the next breath. In such a world, how could anyone truly separate love from power, loyalty from betrayal, or beauty from death? For the Duchess, the answer seemed simple. She would not separate them at all. She would entwine them, binding them together so tightly that one could not exist without the other. And so, the stage was set. A duchess at the height of her influence. A city glittering with culture but rotten with intrigue. A woman torn between duty and desire, learning that her allure could bend men to her will and destroy them just as easily. From this foundation, the legend of the Duchess of Parma was born. What began as the rise of a noblewoman would soon unravel into something far darker, far more chilling, and infinitely more fascinating. Because in the ballroom where she reigned as queen of society, where violins played and nobles twirled, her future victims were already gathering. They just didn't know it yet. In the candlelit courts of Parma, the Duchess shone like a jewel. To the world, she was elegance embodied, her laughter soft, her words carefully chosen, her presence magnetic. Yet behind the silks and jewels, there stirred something more dangerous, a hunger for love, for control, for intimacy that her arranged marriage had never provided. And so began the secret chapters of her life, the whispered names of men who came close to her heart, and the darker whispers of what became of them. The lure of forbidden passion, the Duchess's admirers were many. Some were young courtiers, dazzled by her beauty and wit. Others were seasoned diplomats, men who thought they could charm their way into her favor for political gain. There were soldiers, poets, even members of rival noble houses who risked everything for a moment in her embrace. To each, she offered something intoxicating. For some, it was the warmth of forbidden intimacy. For others, the promise of influence at court. But for the Duchess herself, each romance was more than passion. It was a test of loyalty, of devotion, of whether any man could truly see her not just as a duchess, but as a woman. But obsession is a dangerous fire. And for the men who entered her orbit, it often ended in ashes. Lover 1. The soldier. The first story whispered in Parma was that of a soldier, young, proud, and eager to prove his valor. He met the Duchess not at a banquet, but in the gardens of her palace, where moonlight softened the sharp lines of nobility into something more human. Their affair was brief, but intense. The soldier, intoxicated by her attention, began to speak openly of his conquest. He boasted in taverns, whispered to friends, and soon the story of his intimacy with the Duchess trickled into the ears of those who should never have heard it. Not long after, he vanished. Some said he was sent away on a campaign that never ended. Others whispered he was seen entering the palace one night and never leaving. Years later, when the rumors of skulls beneath the ballroom floor began to spread, many swore his was among them. Lover 2. The poet. If the soldier was passion, the poet was devotion. He wrote verses for her, lines of love that would have scandalized the court if read aloud. To the Duchess, he offered not just desire but worship. But devotion can suffocate as surely as betrayal. The poet grew jealous, paranoid of rivals, desperate to keep her for himself. He confronted her at a masked ball, his words too sharp, his voice too loud. In a world where discretion was everything, his recklessness was a threat. Days later, he was found dead in his chamber. Poisoned, some said. Heartbroken, claimed others. But again, whispers linked his end to the Duchess. Could it be that his skull, too, found its way beneath her ballroom floor, his verses silenced forever, but his hollow grin staring up at the music he once heard by her side? Lover 3. The diplomat. Perhaps the most dangerous of her entanglements was with a visiting diplomat, a man whose presence in Parma was meant to secure alliances. Their romance was passionate, but also political. For him, the Duchess was a conquest that promised influence. For her, he was both lover and liability. When negotiations between his country and Parma soured, the affair turned poisonous. He threatened to expose her, to ruin her reputation, to destroy the careful image she had built. And then, he, too, disappeared. His skull, some later claimed, bore marks not of time, but of violence. If that is true, then his end was not quiet, not accidental, but deliberate. The Duchess had turned passion into execution, transforming betrayal into bone. The pattern of possession. One story might be coincidence. 2, unfortunate chance. But 3, or more, began to form a pattern. A pattern of men drawn in by her allure, consumed by passion, and erased when they became a threat. Each lover represented something different: passion, devotion, ambition. And each, in their own way, failed her. Whether by betrayal, suffocation, or disloyalty, none lived up to the impossible standard she demanded. And so, the Duchess did what few could imagine. She kept them. Not in memory, not in letters, not in portraits or jewelry, but in the most macabre way possible. She preserved them in death. The skulls beneath her ballroom floor were not random trophies. They were tokens of possession, a way of ensuring that those who once held her in their arms would never leave her. While others danced above, they remained, bound to her forever, silent witnesses to her reign. The dual life of a duchess. What makes this tale so haunting is the contrast. By day, she hosted diplomats and artists, dazzling them with wit and charm. By night, she was a woman haunted by the ghosts of her own passions, ghosts she herself had created. Imagine the scene: a masquerade ball in full swing, music soaring, couples gliding across the floor. The Duchess at the center, radiant in jewels and lace, smiling as though nothing in the world could disturb her composure. And just beneath her feet, the hollow sockets of her former lovers staring upward, forever part of her court. This was the dual life she mastered: grace above, horror below, love entwined with death, devotion entwined with destruction. The whispers in Parma. The court, of course, began to whisper. Servants spoke of strange noises at night. Musicians who performed in the ballroom claimed the acoustics carried an eerie echo, as though unseen voices joined their songs. Nobles began to gossip, linking disappearances with the Duchess's affairs. But no one dared accuse her openly. She was too powerful, too untouchable. And perhaps, deep down, the courtiers were enthralled by the legend as much as horrified. There was something irresistible about her story. A woman who dared to live as men did, who took lovers, who wielded power, and who punished betrayal not with tears, but with death. The descent into darkness with each affair, each betrayal, each death, the line between passion and obsession blurred further. The Duchess was no longer just seeking love. She was collecting it, consuming it, immortalizing it in the most grotesque form imaginable. To her, perhaps, the skulls were not symbols of horror but of permanence. Lovers could abandon her, betray her, threaten her, but in death, they belonged to her entirely. She had achieved what no noble marriage, no fleeting romance could ever offer: absolute possession. And so, as the ballroom continued to glitter with light and music, its foundations grew heavier with the weight of secrets. A shrine not of faith, but of obsession. A monument not to God, but to desire turned deadly. The Duchess of Parma had risen beyond her station. She was no longer just a noblewoman, but a legend in the making. And with each skull she placed beneath her ballroom floor, she bound her legacy tighter to the shadows of history. But legends, no matter how carefully crafted, cannot remain hidden forever. And soon, whispers of her obsessions would grow too loud to ignore. Picture it again: the grand ballroom of Parma. Chandeliers blazing with hundreds of candles, the light reflecting off gilded mirrors and polished marble. The Duchess moves among her guests, graceful as ever, her laughter drifting through the air as music swells. Courtiers bow, noblewomen exchange sharp whispers behind jeweled fans, and the night seems alive with celebration. But beauty often masks horror. For beneath this room, beneath the swirling gowns, the tapping heels, the velvet-gloved hands raised in dance, lies something that no guest dares to imagine. A secret graveyard. A hidden collection of skulls, silent and eternal, gazing upward at the living world that continues to dance above them. The discovery, the legend tells us, that the truth came to light years later, when renovations were carried out on the palace. Workers pried open sections of the floor, expecting to find empty foundations or perhaps long-forgotten storage chambers. What they found instead was a sight that would freeze their blood: human skulls, arranged with deliberate care, staring from the shadows beneath the ballroom. Not bones scattered by accident, not the remnants of a plague pit. No, these were individual skulls, placed with intention, as though each had been chosen, preserved, and hidden there for a purpose. The workers whispered among themselves, their tools trembling in their hands. Who had placed them there? And why? The answer, whispered for centuries, always returned to the same name: the Duchess of Parma. A dance above the dead. To imagine the horror, one must consider the symbolism. The ballroom was not merely a place of entertainment. It was the stage upon which the Duchess displayed her power, her refinement, her very identity as the Jewel of Parma. Every banquet, every masquerade, every diplomatic gathering took place on this very floor. Ambassadors toasted to alliances. Musicians played sonatas that echoed through the chamber. Lovers twirled, hands clasped, lips smiling. All the while, beneath their feet, the Duchess's secret audience watched in silence. Skulls of her former lovers, locked forever in their final role as voiceless witnesses. There is something grotesquely theatrical about it, as if the Duchess intended not just to hide them, but to make them part of her life, part of her reign, part of her power. They were trophies, yes, but more than that, they were her collection. A macabre archive of passion and betrayal, sealed beneath the very stage where she triumphed. The symbolism of the skull. Why skulls, specifically? Why not the whole skeleton? In Renaissance thought, the skull held particular meaning. It was the seat of identity, the vessel of thought, the symbol of mortality. Scholars and artists alike used the skull as a reminder of death's inevitability, a memento mori. But for the Duchess, the skull was not a reminder to live virtuously. It was possession. It was the part of her lovers she could keep forever, stripped of flesh, stripped of voice, reduced to silence. The skull was hers, and through it, so too was the memory of the man it once belonged to. Imagine her, perhaps, walking through the ballroom alone at night, her slippers brushing the marble as silence filled the chamber. Above her, moonlight from tall windows. Below her, a hidden crowd of hollow eyes, forever bound to her. Was this comfort? Was it triumph? Or was it madness given form? Whispers in the court. Of course, the discovery of the skulls did not remain a secret. Servants whispered. Nobles speculated. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed she placed each skull beneath the floor with her own hands, a private ritual after each lover's death. Others believed loyal servants did it for her, ensuring the Duchess would never be alone. Still others suggested it was an open secret, that those in her inner circle knew of the skulls, but feared her too much to speak. The ballroom took on a darker reputation. Musicians who performed there swore the acoustics were strange, as though ghostly voices echoed their songs. Dancers spoke of sudden chills, as if unseen eyes were watching them. And in hushed tones, people began to call it not just the Duchess's ballroom, but her crypt. The psychology of obsession. What compelled her to do this? Some argue it was madness, that the Duchess, isolated and suffocated by duty, lost herself in obsession. Others see it as calculated, a demonstration of power. In a world where women were disposable, she turned the tables. It was she who consumed, she who collected, she who made men disposable. Perhaps the skulls were her way of holding on to love. Lovers betrayed her, disappointed her, or threatened her, but in death, they could never leave. Beneath her feet, they remained hers, forever present, forever silent. It was not enough to love. She had to possess. The ballroom is theater. What makes this tale so haunting is the duality of it all. The ballroom, outwardly a place of beauty, music, and diplomacy, was secretly a theater of death. Above, chandeliers, laughter, celebration. Below, silence, bone, decay. It was a perfect reflection of the Duchess herself. To the world, she was charm and grace. In private, she was obsession and darkness. The ballroom was not just her stage, it was her mirror. A legacy etched in horror as the years passed. The ballroom remained at the heart of Parma's court. Nobles danced, unaware of the true audience beneath their feet. Guests toasted to alliances, never knowing that beneath the very spot where they raised their cups, a skull grinned silently back at them. The Duchess's secret was at once hidden and omnipresent. Hidden in the sense that no one dared confront her directly. Omnipresent in that every whisper, every rumor, every strange echo in the ballroom reminded people of what might lie beneath. She had transformed her palace into a monument of contradiction, beauty above, horror below. And in doing so, she secured her legacy, not as a passive noblewoman in history's pages, but as a legend who blurred the line between elegance and evil. The haunting question, and so we return to the haunting image. The Duchess, radiant in silk, smiling at her guests, while beneath her the skulls of her lovers watched silently. Was she insane? Was she vengeful? Or was she, in her own twisted way, ahead of her time. A woman who refused to be discarded, who refused to be powerless, who claimed absolute control over those who entered her orbit. Whatever the answer, the ballroom remains one of the most chilling symbols of her life. A place where the dead and the living shared the same space, where music and silence intertwined, where love itself became indistinguishable from death. The Duchess of Parma did not just keep lovers. She kept them forever. When we try to understand the Duchess of Parma, we must step beyond the glittering halls of her palace, beyond the rumors whispered in candlelit corridors, and into the recesses of her mind. Because her story is not merely about romance or murder, not simply about skulls hidden beneath a ballroom floor. It is about a woman caught in the impossible tension between love and power, between loneliness and control, between the role she was forced to play and the desires she could not silence. To be a duchess in Renaissance Italy was to live within walls, walls built not of stone alone, but of expectation. From the moment of her birth, her body, her choices, even her future were claimed by dynastic ambition. She was expected to marry strategically, to bear heirs, to smile with composure no matter what sacrifices were demanded. Love was not her privilege. Desire was not her right. The truest measure of her worth was political utility. And yet, behind the silks, behind the jewels, she remained human. A woman who longed to be seen, to be cherished, to be desired for herself rather than for her title. It is here that her obsessions were born. The men she drew into her orbit were not simply lovers. They were attempts to reclaim something denied her since childhood, intimacy that was hers alone, ungoverned by treaties or bloodlines. But when such intimacy is sought under the crushing weight of duty, it rarely remains tender. Passion turns feverish. Desire becomes possession. And love, once corrupted, can curdle into obsession. Her collection of skulls, if we dare call it that, was the ultimate expression of this obsession. She had tasted love in fleeting moments, but she had also tasted betrayal, disappointment, and humiliation. Perhaps she realized what all nobles secretly feared, that people, unlike jewels or palaces, could not be kept. They betrayed, they abandoned, they grew tired. And so she found a way to keep them after all. In death, her lovers could not betray her. In silence, they could not expose her. Beneath her feet, they belonged to her completely. Some historians whisper of madness. And indeed, her actions seem unthinkable to us today. But what is madness, if not the extreme form of a very human impulse? Who among us has not wanted to freeze a moment, to hold on to someone forever, to refuse the pain of loss? For most, this longing remains a fantasy, an ache. For the Duchess, with her power, her isolation, and her dangerous freedom, it became a reality. Psychologists might name it obsessional love disorder or pathological possession. They might point to traits of narcissism, of control, of compulsion. But no diagnosis can fully explain the eerie poetry of her actions. She was not a common criminal. She was not killing for money, nor for convenience, nor for sadistic pleasure. Her motives were more intimate, more terrifying. She blurred the line between love and death until they became indistinguishable. It is tempting to see her as a monster, a cold-blooded killer who turned passion into graveyards. Yet there is another interpretation, one that casts her not simply as villain but as victim of her time. In a world where women were traded like currency, where their desires were silenced and their voices ignored, the Duchess of Parma seized control in the only way she could. She took what was denied her, love, intimacy, permanence, and remade it into her own, however grotesque. Consider, too, the symbolic defiance of her actions. Men of her era often kept trophies of conquest, locks of hair, portraits, or even more morbid relics. For them, love and dominance were intertwined without question. But when a woman did the same, when she claimed her lovers not as memories but as possessions, the world recoiled in horror. Perhaps what made the Duchess unforgivable was not the act itself, but the inversion of gendered power. She had become what society never permitted her to be, a woman who consumed rather than was consumed. And yet, the horror remains. Whatever the explanation, whatever the psychology, the fact is undeniable. Beneath her ballroom floor, love and death were bound together. Her legacy became not one of tenderness, but of terror. And even centuries later, we struggle to understand whether she was driven by madness, by vengeance, or by a hunger that could never be satisfied. To step into her mind is to enter a labyrinth. Every path leads to contradiction. Was she lonely, or was she powerful? Was she cruel, or was she desperate? Did she love too much, or not at all? The answers slip like shadows across the walls of history, refusing to resolve into certainty. But perhaps certainty is not the point. Perhaps her story endures precisely because it resists easy explanation, because it reminds us that love, in its darkest form, can become indistinguishable from obsession, because it forces us to face the uncomfortable truth that within every desire for intimacy lies the seed of control, and that under the right conditions, even affection can become fatal. So when we picture the Duchess walking across her ballroom, radiant in silk and jewels, we see not just a noblewoman, but a riddle. Was she smiling at her guests, or at the secret audience beneath her feet? Did she hear only the violins, or the echo of silence rising from below? Did she see herself as monster, or as queen? We may never know. But one thing is certain. In the Duchess of Parma, love and madness were inseparable. And in the ballroom she left behind, the line between romance and ruin will forever remain blurred. Secrets in noble courts rarely remain buried forever. Whispers travel faster than soldiers, faster than treaties, faster even than love. And in Parma, where every servant had ears and every noble had rivals, the Duchess's secrets began to unravel. At first, they were murmurs, fragile as candle flames. A guard who swore he had seen a lover enter the palace one night and never leave. A servant who noticed strange stains on silks. A musician who claimed the ballroom echoed with voices that did not belong to the living. The rumors spread slowly, and then all at once. To some, they were thrilling scandal. The Duchess, the radiant hostess of Parma, not only seducing but destroying the men who adored her. To others, they were warnings, proof that the woman who smiled with grace at banquets hid something monstrous beneath her jewels. The whispers gained weight when men truly did begin to vanish. A soldier sent on campaign, never heard from again. A poet who drank too deeply and died too suddenly. A diplomat who returned home in a coffin, his cause of death left suspiciously vague. Each disappearance added fuel to the fire. Yet in a world where appearances were everything, direct accusation was unthinkable. To confront the Duchess was to invite political chaos. She was not a servant to be dismissed or a commoner to be tried. She was Parma's jewel, bound by dynastic ties, shielded by her rank. To name her a murderer would have meant not only her downfall, but the collapse of alliances, the shattering of reputations, the humiliation of families who depended on her standing. Silence was safer than scandal. And so the court did what courts so often do. It pretended not to see. Banquets continued. Dances filled the ballroom. Diplomats still kissed her hand and praised her charm. Outwardly, nothing changed. But beneath the surface, suspicion grew like rot behind painted walls. Those who danced in her ballroom could not ignore the chill that clung to the room. They could not ignore the sensation of being watched, as though unseen eyes followed their every step. The whispers that skulls lay beneath their feet, watching silently, became impossible to silence. For the Duchess herself, the growing suspicion only tightened her dual existence. She smiled brighter, laughed louder, entertained more lavishly, as though to drown out the rumors with splendor. Yet the harder she tried to dazzle, the darker the shadows became. She knew, perhaps, that the truth had begun to leak through the cracks, and yet she also knew that her position gave her an armor no ordinary woman could possess. She was too high to be dragged down easily. Still, even armor has weak points. Enemies at court, rivals in politics, jealous noblewomen, all had reasons to see her ruined. They began to fan the flames, repeating the rumors, twisting them into tales even more grotesque. Some claimed she drank the blood of her lovers. Others swore she conducted black rituals in the dead of night. The skulls beneath her ballroom became not just scandal but legend, growing darker with every telling. The tension was unbearable. Could she be exposed? Would the truth ever be revealed? Or would it remain forever an open secret, half believed and half denied, like so many stories of powerful families? In the end, the answer depended less on justice and more on politics. As long as the Duchess was useful, as long as she entertained visiting monarchs and soothed fragile alliances, the rumors could remain just that, rumors. Whispers traded in corridors, never written down, never spoken aloud in chambers of law. And so the Duchess endured. Her legend grew in shadows while her reputation glittered in light. She continued to host, to charm, to reign over her ballroom with elegance, all while beneath her the skulls remained sealed in silence. It was as though she had mastered the art of contradiction, living in two worlds at once, one of admiration, one of fear. But time, as it always does, began to wear away at her defenses. Age dulled her beauty, though not her sharpness of mind. Younger women entered court, fresh and dazzling, and whispers began to shift. Once she had been untouchable, but now she was vulnerable, no longer the radiant jewel she had been. The protection her allure had once provided began to weaken. The rumors, long ignored, resurfaced with sharper edges. What had once been scandalous gossip now became a convenient weapon for those who sought to diminish her influence. Whether the skulls were ever truly uncovered in her lifetime remains uncertain. Some say they were discovered only after her death, when her palace was renovated and the grim collection was revealed to horrified workers. Others insist they were always known, that the court itself chose to look away until her passing made the truth safer to acknowledge. What matters is that by then, her reputation was already fixed. To many, she was not remembered as the elegant Duchess of Parma, but as the woman whose ballroom was built on bones. This was the aftermath of her scandal. Not trial, not imprisonment, not even exile, but something far more insidious, immortality through infamy. She had slipped beyond the reach of earthly justice, but not beyond the reach of memory. Her story lingered in the city's whispers, in the fearful glances cast at her ballroom, in the strange chill that seemed to haunt its polished marble floor. She had become legend, and legends, as we know, are often more powerful than truth. The court of Parma survived. The palace continued its banquets. Music filled the ballroom long after her footsteps faded. Yet no one could quite shake the feeling that beneath the floor, beneath the laughter and music, the Duchess still held her court of the dead. Every dance became a danse macabre, every toast a ritual in a room that was both celebration hall and crypt. The Duchess had wanted permanence, and in this she succeeded. Though her lovers had died, though her beauty had faded, though her dynasty itself would eventually pass into history, her name endured, not as a noble hostess, not as a political figure, but as a legend whispered with unease. A woman who kept her lovers' skulls beneath her ballroom floor, turning desire into death, turning love into silence. And as the centuries passed, the whispers became a myth, and the myth became a legacy darker than any jewel or crown she could have worn. History is not a ledger. It is not a clean account book of names, dates, and deeds. It is a living thing, shaped as much by whispers as by proclamations, as much by the shadows of rumor as by the ink of chroniclers. And the Duchess of Parma is proof of that. We cannot say with certainty how many lovers she took, nor how many skulls lay beneath her ballroom floor. What we can say, with absolute certainty, is that her story survived, long after her reign ended, long after her bones were dust, long after her palace itself changed hands. Her legacy is not written in treaties or in dynasties, but in dread. The people of Parma remembered. For generations, they spoke her name in hushed voices, especially when passing the grand palace that had once housed her dances. Children dared each other to run across the ballroom at night, swearing that cold fingers would brush their ankles from below. Servants told stories of footsteps echoing where no one walked, of music playing faintly from empty rooms, as though the Duchess still hosted her midnight banquets for her silent court. Whether these were ghost stories or guilty imaginations, they ensured she was never forgotten. Her tale spread beyond Parma. Travelers carried it across Italy, then across Europe, embellishing it with each retelling. In some versions, she was a sorceress, keeping skulls not as trophies but as instruments of black magic. In others, she was a predator of men, a femme fatale centuries before the term existed, luring lovers only to consume them. Still others painted her as a tragic figure, cursed by loneliness, collecting skulls not out of cruelty but out of desperation to never be left again. Each retelling reshaped her into what the audience most feared or most secretly desired. That is the strange thing about figures like the Duchess. They become mirrors for society's anxieties. To men of the Renaissance, her story was a warning against female power, against women who claimed authority over men's bodies and lives. To later romantics, she became a symbol of the destructive intensity of passion, a reminder that love carried to extremes can become indistinguishable from madness. And to modern audiences, she lingers as an uneasy blend of both, at once villain and victim, monster and martyr. The ballroom itself became central to her legend. Architecture, after all, is the stage upon which memory performs. For centuries, people entered that polished chamber with unease, their eyes drawn downward even as music swelled around them. No matter how brightly the chandeliers glowed, no matter how lavish the festivities, the marble floor always seemed too cold, too silent, as though the dead still pressed against it from below. Guests whispered of feeling faint, of sudden chills that clung to their skin, of shadows that seemed to linger where no dancer moved. It was said that the Duchess designed it that way, that she wanted every celebration to be haunted, every waltz to be shadowed by the reminder of what lay beneath. Even as generations passed, the allure of her darkness remained irresistible. Novelists borrowed her story. Painters hinted at her legend in canvases of women dancing atop skeletons. Poets, entranced by her duality of beauty and horror, transformed her into metaphor. In every age, she was reimagined anew. Sometimes a witch, sometimes a saint of obsession, sometimes the embodiment of death masquerading as love. But beneath all these retellings lies a simple truth. She defied the boundaries her society imposed. Women were expected to endure, to submit, to be remembered for their virtue or their airs. She refused. She carved her own path, however grotesque, however horrifying. And in doing so, she ensured her memory would outlive those of countless noble women whose names have been lost to the silence of history. That is perhaps the most unsettling part of her legacy. We may recoil from her actions, but we cannot look away. She horrifies us, yes, but she also fascinates us, because she broke the rules we still feel pressing upon us today. The hunger to possess love forever, the fear of being abandoned, the refusal to accept limits. These are not alien impulses. They are human impulses. The Duchess simply carried them to their darkest extreme. And in that darkness, we recognize a part of ourselves. As centuries blurred, her story crossed into the realm of legend so fully that historians often struggle to separate fact from folklore. Did she truly hide skulls beneath her ballroom? Or was that detail a later invention, born from whispers, embellished by enemies, magnified by storytellers who crave the macabre? The answer may be forever beyond reach. But perhaps it does not matter. Because in history, perception is often more powerful than fact. The Duchess of Parma will always be remembered as the woman whose grandeur was built on bones. Whether literal or symbolic, that image is impossible to erase. And so we arrive at her true immortality, not the kind secured by monuments or dynasties, but the kind etched into imagination. Every time her story is told, every time her name is whispered with dread, she rises again, not as flesh but as legend. She achieved what so many rulers dreamed of. She was never forgotten. In the end, the Duchess's legacy forces us to confront a question that is as uncomfortable as it is profound. What do we choose to remember? Do we preserve the clean, polished surface of history, the official records, the noble portraits? Or do we look beneath the floor, at the skulls, at the darkness hidden under beauty? Because the Duchess reminds us that history is never as clean as we want it to be. Behind every ballroom, there is a crypt. Behind every crown, there is a shadow. The Duchess of Parma stands at the crossroads of history and myth, her story half-documented, half-whispered, yet entirely unforgettable. She was at once a woman of her time and a figure who defied it. She was both admired and feared, both elegant and grotesque. She was human, and perhaps that is what makes her so terrifying. Because in her hunger for permanence, in her desperate attempts to keep love forever, we glimpse the reflection of our own secret desires. And that is why, even now, centuries later, her story still grips us. It is not only the horror of skulls beneath a ballroom floor. It is the realization that love and obsession, power and madness, beauty and death, all dance together in ways we cannot always separate. She is gone, but her dance continues, echoing through time. So when you think of Parma, when you imagine its palaces and its noble history, do not think only of treaties and dynasties. Think of the Duchess who danced above silence. Think of the guests who laughed nervously while their feet tapped against marble, knowing, or fearing, that something waited below. Think of the woman who turned her loneliness into legend, her passion into horror, her memory into immortality. The Duchess of Parma may be dead, but her ballroom remains. And when the lights are low, when the music fades, and when the marble floor glows cold beneath your feet, you may still feel her watching. You may still hear the faint echo of her laughter. And you may realize that some dances never end.